will be like in the last days. That phrase, the last days, comes from verse 1 in 2 Timothy 3. And these verses, 1 through 9, give us a very vivid description. If you were listening as she read, I've read it sitting in my office. I've read this passage numerous times. But this week, in preparing for this morning, I read it silently, I read it out loud, so I hear the words. It moves me. It moves me. Very vivid description there. Do you catch the power of what it's going to be like the last days? People that are lovers of themselves versus lovers of God. Lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. Lovers of money. Disobedient to parents and all the stuff that is there. The last days. Now, the sermon isn't about when is the last days, but we need to just touch on that briefly as we're getting into this. When is the last days? Technically, if you read Acts chapter 2, that Peter gets up and preaches that great sermon on the day of Pentecost, and he quotes from Joel, the prophecy in Joel, and he says, in the last days, God said he's poured out his Spirit, and sons and daughters will prophesy and dream dreams and so forth. So technically, we've been in the last days ever since Acts chapter 2, the day of Pentecost. But in this particular passage, and I agree, as most evangelical scholars would say, that what Paul is referring to here, Paul writing this to this young pastor Timothy, that he's speaking about the broad picture from Acts to the return of Jesus Christ, but he is probably a lot more specific and narrow. He's talking about the time very close to the return of Jesus. The last days are going to be terrible times. And listen to those words from this NIV translation. Terrible times. It's terrible. It says nothing about economic collapse or recession or depression or all of that, but terrible in terms of where do people give their priorities? To what are they committed? Lovers of themselves as opposed to lovers of God. And thus enters into this description, this context of the last days, these terrible times. There is a characteristic that manifests itself that Paul refers to as weak-willed women. That phrase appears nowhere else in Scripture, okay, except here. Weak-willed women. The New American Standard, if you were to read that, Mary Lou, when she reads, she usually reads from the NAS, says weak women. The King James, if you have the old trusty King James translation, it says silly women. I don't think they all do the greatest justice to what it really means. But if you were to study this word, you will discover that it means women who are spiritually feeble. Okay? Just let that kind of settle. But what Paul's talking about here are spiritually feeble women being a characteristic of the terrible times of the last days. It means women who are not strong spiritually, women who are not maturing and growing spiritually. They are spiritually feeble. Now that is an important subject. Certainly in and of itself it's an important subject. But the fact that Paul, the apostle, chooses to interject it here when he's describing the last days. And that's what I trust that you see this morning. He's talking about these terrible times and interjects this phrase one time only, anywhere in Scripture. It's right here. There will be women who are weak-willed or spiritually feeble. What I want to focus on, and what I think the Apostle Paul does here, is that he teaches us and helps us to identify these weak-willed, spiritually feeble women of this period of time known as the last days. Now here's my purpose. It's twofold. I want us to look at this passage because I think 2 Timothy 3 will help us identify who those women are. You know, he doesn't say all women are going to be like that in the last days, but that there will be spiritually feeble, weak-willed women. So I want us to learn how to identify them, but also to motivate us that we would not be like them. And I say we, because this is not going to be a pick-on-women sermon, okay? So ladies, just relax. Even though we're going to focus on women, and this is what this is really all about, you, I think, will quickly see that what Paul is talking about here certainly can relate to men, it can relate to teens, but we're going to focus on the women, that we would be motivated, and that you would be motivated to live Christ-centered lives as we face this period of time referred to as the terrible times of the last days. Let's look at these identifying traits of a spiritually feeble woman from 2 Timothy 3. The first thing that we discovered here is that she allows herself to be she allows self-centered people to control her. Now I want to take the truths that we find in this passage and use that expositorily as the basis for this sermon. A weak-willed woman, a spiritually feeble woman, she allows self-centered people to control her. Look at verse 6. They are the kind, and we'll come back and address the kind in a moment, they are the kind who worm their way into homes and gain control over weak-willed women. Verse 6. The they here, the they of the kind, refers to the people of verses 2 through 5. They are the self-centered people. The people that love themselves more than they love God. Those are the people that love pleasure more than they love God. People that love money more than they love God. And all the other terrible things that are listed here in those verses. So the they are those people that come in and creep into or worm their way into people's homes and gain control over weak-willed, spiritually feeble women. Spiritually feeble women have opened their homes and their lives to people who love themselves and will use them for their advantage. Let me give you a couple examples. Probably the most outstanding example of this we find in the book of Genesis. A biblical example is Eve. And there is Eve, Adam and Eve, just kind of cruising along and enjoying life and having a good time in the garden. Almost near perfect paradise kind of condition. And along comes Satan, the serpent. Eve listens to the lies of Satan